So Amjad, here we are in Istanbul. It's the Bosphorus, magnificent view here, and we are discussing our vision for the Sharq region. Our Sharq Forum has done an excellent job, but we also have to face up to realities. And one of the events coming up, which will have major impact, is the upcoming US election. So what's your guess? What will happen and what will be the implications for the Middle East and North Africa?
Well, first of all, Dimitri, it's wonderful to be with you, and it's fantastic to be with the Sharq Forum. Being in Istanbul at a time where there is the actual dissolution of a state right next door with millions of refugees flowing in here is very surreal. It reminds me of being in Vienna, of people being in Vienna at the time of the Bosnia War and being in cafes and everything was perfectly normal, but just a few hours away there were horrific crimes happening. And very appreciative that the Sharq Forum is putting on such an excellent conference to try to address this and see how we can create a vision for the future that would be better. The irony then to your question is that in the United States, a lot of the vision question seems to have disappeared from, the United States has started from a very grandiose vision of creating a new architecture for the Middle East, which has ended up disastrously. And it's recoiled from that, and now there's more of an isolationist trend and isolationist perspective vis-a-vis the Middle East in terms of how the United States should be involved. And I think in the elections, another example where the United States is losing even its own belief in its own exceptionalism is that our elections are now very similar to the elections in a lot of other countries, including non-industrial, non-Western countries, where the elections are under a lot of stress and the candidates are under a lot of pressure. In terms of the situation here, I think, especially vis-a-vis Russia, both candidates, Hillary Clinton, both of the two dominant candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, are taking a position where a reset has to be done with Russia. But they want to take the resets in two completely different directions. So Donald Trump has made it clear that the reset should be a positive one with Russia, to develop a cooperative sharing relationship with Russia based on mutual interests and transactional relationships. Some people accuse him of being more concerned about the transactional relationships of his own business dealings in Russia. But whether that's the case or not, the strategic argument that he makes, to the extent that he would make a strategic argument, is that the United States needs to have a cooperative arrangement with Russia vis-a-vis Syria, and then that could help resolve the conflict. In some ways, it's actually a variation of Kerry's diplomacy with Lavrov and an attempt to work with him. Hillary Clinton has taken a far more aggressive posture, and she has had a long history of actually being a hawk on most foreign policy issues, and so it's not unlikely that she is actually authentic about her desire to assume a tougher line with Russia. The challenge, I think, is for both of them. I think it would be easier to implement Donald Trump's reset. It's harder to see what actual options, and very pragmatically, a new Clinton administration would have in terms of resetting with Russia in a more aggressive posture that would actually get the United States to the goals that it wants.
Yeah, I mean, she is someone who believes in a more muscular approach to things, but at this point it's very difficult to tell what are the options on the table for her. And also it's interesting what Russians see as an endgame in Syria. It's very easy to see how they benefit from the short term. If there is a deal, they tend to be one of the guarantors. If there is no deal, on the other hand, they are making gains on the ground and they're boosting the regime. But the long term is anything but clear from their perspective. One thing we discussed in our session was the involvement of external powers in the nexus Syria and Iraq. has that changed over time, and in what ways? We have so many people, so many actors involved there. How do you see that dynamic?
I guess nature abhors a vacuum, and politics abhors a vacuum. And the region has had an artificial sense of stability. It's had autocratic, regimes, military regimes, dictatorships that have created a semblance, a veneer
Right.
of stability. But in fact, it hasn't been stability. It's just been domination and control. It hasn't been legitimacy either. So when the United States shattered that system with the invasion of Iraq, I think it's created a vacuum that not just the local players, but external players have all attempted to play a role in. And no one has done it well, and no one has done it in a way. I think the conversations we were having earlier are about how does one create a pluralistic vision
Right.
for the future. And we've heard here in Turkey so many officials referencing the necessity of having a pluralistic, inclusive system in the region, not just within each of the countries, but across the countries as well. That doesn't seem, however, to be necessarily, that goal doesn't seem to be reflected in the actual policies that are actually being implemented by a host of different countries and a host of different players in the region right now. It seems to be a very exclusivist, that everyone is seeking a very exclusivist outcome.
Yeah, it's the winner takes all
Right.
mentality time and again. And one thing we did talk about was the record of Bosnia and the Dayton Peace Agreement, and you said something really important. Earlier, Izetbegovic in 1995 said that Dayton was not a just peace, but it was less unjust than the status quo. And I don't think we're heading for a just peace in Syria under the best of circumstances, but maybe it's worth teasing out what a less unjust scenario might look like.
The advantage that Bosnia had was that the government at the time was fighting for a very clearly defined set of political values and civic values, a multi-ethnic, pluralistic citizen state. And here, we don't even have an articulation of that goal by any central party. It's unclear who supports the concept of an inclusive, pluralistic system as the outcome of it. And the challenge, another part of our conversations here today have been the challenge of how to avoid the default sectarianism, not that's within the region, but the default sectarianism from foreign policy planners in the United States or in Europe, whose default solution to problems in the region are to divide it up by ethnicity or by tribe or by religion. The region itself has always been multi-ethnic. The region has always been pluralistic. I mean, throughout the history of the region, it has always had different religions, different ethnic groups, different peoples, and they've always worked together in some collaborative model, if not egalitarian, at least collaborative. The switch to an idea of having little tribal states or tribal regions doesn't seem to be a solution, in my opinion, that's going to be implementable. But it is what a lot of the parties are working towards, and the direction I think that even the Russians and the Americans in the policies, the de facto, even despite the rhetoric of U.S.-Russian hostility right now, they actually seem to be more on the same side in terms of what their goals are right now in the short term, as opposed to the long term for Syria. And so I guess the question I would have for you is that do you see any party, Russia or anybody else, having a goal for the region that would be consistent with the interests of the people of the region, which is to be able to live together collaboratively?
Well, maybe all parties are rhetorically committed to such a vision, but as you rightly pointed out in their short-term policy decisions, they pursue very different goals. As far as Russia is concerned, and that's one of the topics we've discussed at length this conference, I don't think Russia has a long-term agenda. It's clearly using Syria crisis as a piece of leverage to promote its status and get the attention of the Obama administration, and maybe get leverage on other issues and make trade-offs on all kinds of dossiers. And certainly it wants to boost the Assad regime. But beyond those goals, I don't think there is a clear vision what Syria must look like, and Russia is limited by the availability of resources. In other words, it doesn't have the military strength or the economic leverage to bring to bear, which is a problem because, as we discussed, potential deal has to have buy-in by all kinds of players, both regional and international. But I think the buck stops in Washington ultimately. U.S. administration has to be at the center of an arrangement. But as you rightly said, it's very difficult to identify, especially in this intellectual and political climate we have these days, what a forward-leading American approach would be. Whether the new administration will have the intellectual blueprint, and if it does have one, will that be consistent with the demand from the ground, as it were? So there's plenty of room for skepticism, despite, again, we should commend our Sharq Forum that in these difficult times it's trying to carry the flag of positive thinking and forward vision.
Well, and so actually that's I think where we should end the conversation, is on the positive side, because the difference between analysis is that analysis is almost always universally negative.
Yeah.
There are many facts that would lead you to say that that's in fact the honest assessment. Activists and people who are living in the region have no choice but to find hope and to try to figure out a way forward and to try to create a better world for them and their children. And the Sharq Forum seems to be trying to bridge that gap between an honest analysis of the problems the region faces and providing potential avenues for hope. And that's the challenge that we've been having in our sessions, which is to find out what is the most positive avenue, what's the thread of hope that we can take out of this hardship. And I wanted to ask you if, from what you've heard and what we've been talking about, where that hope might lie.
Well, from the energy of the people in the region. Remember, before the Arab Spring, there was so much by way of downbeat assessment and pessimism of the region, and we discovered that there was energy coming from the bottom up that was capable of transforming the politics. Of course, the outcomes were not what many people expected them to be, but still that proved that sometimes our short-term analysis is skewed by inability to see the underlying trends, and maybe the long-term prospects before the regions are not as gloomy as they seem from today's vantage point. But on this brighter note, let me thank you for your cooperation, for your input for this exciting forum that we have in Istanbul.
It's been my pleasure, and I mean, for me, the greatest positive note that I've been able to pull from this is the participation of so many people from the region, because for all of them, coming up with a better future, a future where everyone will be able to live in dignity and freedom, is actually a necessity. And that energy, that hope, creates actual solutions. I mean, the fact that that's what they want to achieve means that their problem solving is all aimed in that direction. And it's something, I think, for those of us who live outside the region, especially in the United States and in Europe, to try to learn from, because it's very easy there to simply look at the entire region with such limited understanding and to give up on it. And maybe what we need to do more of is to listen to those voices from the people inside the region and see the solutions that they're finding for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great way to end the conversation. So thanks once more.
Thank you.